Now, you might think that he advocates a state of passivity or inaction because of the emphasis on stillness and so on, and surrender, but that's not the case. That would be a misperception. In fact, he said, the price of inaction is far greater than the cost of making a mistake. And now let's see how he reconciles activity with that inner state of surrender and stillness. Of course, that's vitally important. This talk is called On Inner and Outer Works. Supposing someone wanted to withdraw into themselves with all their faculties, both inner and outer, and they were in this state in such a way that there were neither any images nor impulses in them, and they were thus without any form of activity, either inner or outer, then they would have to note carefully whether there are not in them any spontaneous promptings to action. If nothing impels them to act, and they do not wish to undertake anything, then they should energetically force themselves to act, whether internally or externally, for we should rest content with nothing, however good it may seem to be, so that when we find ourselves under pressure or constraint, it will be apparent that we are more worked than working, and so that we may learn to enter into relationship of cooperation with our God. So you are not working, you are worked. God is working through you as you dwell in source awareness. Then that which emanates from the source, which is the Godhead, Tao, that which emanates is power and energy. And so, it is not that we should abandon, neglect or deny our inner self, but we should learn to work precisely in it, with it and from it in such a way that interiority turns into effective action, and effective action leads back to interiority, and we become used to acting without any compulsion. So it's not reactivity, it's not acting because you get these egoic urges, but the impulse comes from a much deeper place. So we become used to acting without any compulsion. For we should concentrate on this inner prompting and act from it, whether through reading or praying, or, if it is fitting, some form of external activity. Though if the external activity destroys the internal one, if you get stressed, if you get lost, as I call it, you get lost in the doing, if the external activity destroys the internal one, we should give priority to the latter. The inner is foundational, in other words. But if both are united as one, then that is best for cooperating with God. And our most important work, he says, is the eradication of self. But you can't do it by yourself, he says. However great this eradication and reduction of self may be, it remains insufficient if God does not complete it in us. So this brings us to the question of humility. And what that is. There is, of course, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about not seeking the highest place, but seek the lowest place. That's a universal spiritual teaching. And I've often spoken about this in various ways, and Master Eckhart also talks about that. If you humble yourself, you are exalted. That is the teaching from the New Testament. But you are not exalted in such a way as if being brought low were one thing and being raised on high another. Rather, the highest point of the elevation lies in the deep ground of humility. For the deeper and lower the ground, the higher and more immeasurable is the elevation and the height. The deeper the well, the higher it is, for the height and the depth are one. That Jesus said, "He who desires to be the greatest, let him be the least among you. Whoever wishes to be the former must become the latter." For this being is found only in that becoming. Gospel also says, whoever humbles themselves will be lifted up. And now Master Eckhart says, for our entire being is founded purely on a process of becoming nothingness. That is he is pointing to the evolution of the human being and the transition from being form identified to becoming essence identified. So your work is to become nothingness, which is not to emphasize the physical, or more importantly, the psychological form of I. And there are many ways of not emphasizing that, and of course one we already looked at just now, which is to be aligned with whatever happens in the present moment. And to be vigilant so that whenever the inner compulsion comes to be special, to stand out, to be right, to identify with your mental position and gaining strength in doing so, you are identified with form. And you're trapped. And the birth cannot happen, as Master Eckhart would say.